A master's degree? Richard Whitmore laughed, loud enough for every executive at the 42-foot walnut table to hear. He held Danielle Brooks's resume between two fingers, glanced at the degree, then dropped it beside his coffee. Frame it. Maybe it will impress someone who has never built a real company. A few nervous laughs slipped through the glass boardroom. Danielle felt heat climb beneath her collar, but she did not look away. She was the only black woman in the room, wearing a blue contractor badge among 12 executives in tailored suits, and Richard had made sure everyone remembered exactly where she stood. Behind him, a wall-sized dashboard pulsed red. 3 manufacturing plants. 72 hours of inventory remaining. Millions of dollars bleeding by the hour. Yet Danielle was no longer looking at Richard. She was staring at one number on the screen. Something was wrong. Sir? She said. Richard turned slowly. We are finished here. Somebody changed your data. The laughter died. Air conditioning whispered through the ceiling vents. Nathan Caldwell, Whitmore Medical's chief operating officer, stopped tapping his silver pen. Richard's jaw tightened. Excuse me? Danielle stepped closer to the screen. Her shoes clicked once against the polished stone floor before Richard raised a hand. Do not! She stopped. Around the table, faces hardened. Danielle could hear the faint hum of the projector, and her own pulse beneath it. Your emergency report says the Memphis facility has 28,000 units available, she said. Yesterday's logistics reconciliation showed 19,400. Caldwell leaned back. Inventory moves. Not 8,600 units overnight without a receiving record. Silence. Richard looked toward Caldwell, then back at Danielle. His expression shifted from irritation to something colder. And you know this because? Because I reconciled the shipment files. Richard gave a short laugh. You are a temporary logistics analyst. Yes. Not finance. No, not operations leadership. No. His eyes dropped deliberately to her blue badge. Then perhaps you should remember which floor you work on. The humiliation landed harder than the laughter. Danielle's fingers tightened around the folder against her chest. She could have stepped back. Everyone expected her to. Instead, she looked at the dashboard again. A second number had caught her attention. Then a third. All 3 belonged to different suppliers. All 3 ended in the same unusual freight surcharge, $47,600. Exactly? Her stomach tightened. Coincidence did not repeat itself that cleanly. Who approved these vendors? She asked. Caldwell's pen stopped moving. Richard stared at her. That is not your concern. It becomes my concern if the numbers are false. A chair creaked. Someone near the far end quietly closed a laptop. Caldwell smiled, but the skin around his eyes did not move. Richard, she is confused. We are in the middle of a supply emergency, and she is reading patterns into routine adjustments. Danielle turned toward him. Then show me the receiving records. Caldwell's smile disappeared. Richard rose from his chair. He was 6 feet 2 inches tall, silver-haired, perfectly composed, and the room seemed to rise with him. Ms. Brooks, people in this room have spent 30 years building what you have studied in textbooks. He pushed her resume across the table. Your degree does not give you permission to accuse my executives. Danielle looked down at the paper. Her mother had cried when that degree arrived in the mail. Danielle had worked nights for it, studied beside hospital beds for it, and now it sat beneath Richard Whitmore's hand like a punch line. She swallowed the anger before it reached her voice. I am not accusing anyone. Good. I am saying the data was altered. Richard's face went still. Caldwell looked toward the screen. Danielle opened her folder and pulled out 3 invoices she had printed downstairs. Her hands were steady now. 3 suppliers. 3 different company names. 3 different contracts. She placed the pages side by side. But the freight codes route through the same distribution warehouse. Caldwell stood abruptly. That is enough. Danielle barely heard him. At the bottom of the final invoice was a vendor authorization number. She had seen it before, less than 10 minutes ago, attached to an internal approval file she was never supposed to notice. Her eyes moved from the paper to the executive table. Then they stopped on Caldwell's silver pen. The same initials engraved on its side appeared beside the authorization number. N.C. Richard reached for the invoices. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Danielle looked at Caldwell. For the first time, the powerful executive was no longer smiling. "I think your supply crisis was created on purpose." No one moved. Then Richard's phone vibrated against the table. Once. Twice. He looked down. The color drained from his face. A new alert had appeared from the Memphis plant. Inventory verification failed. Danielle stared at the screen as another red warning flashed beneath it. Then another. 3 facilities. 3 failures. At exactly the same time. Caldwell quietly slipped his phone into his pocket. Danielle saw it. And suddenly she understood something far worse than missing inventory. Someone inside Whitmore Medical was not hiding a crisis. They were timing one. The third warning hit the screen before anyone spoke. Memphis. Cleveland. St. Louis. 3 plants showing inventory that did not exist. Richard Whitmore stared at the red alerts while the ventilation system hissed above the boardroom like static. "How much?" he asked. His voice had lost its edge. The chief financial officer swallowed. "If production stops across all 3 facilities, we start missing hospital contracts by Friday." Danielle watched Nathan Caldwell instead. He was not shocked. That frightened her more than the numbers. His thumb moved beneath the table, tapping something on his phone, then the screen went dark. "We need the physical counts," Danielle said. Richard snapped his eyes toward her. "I did not ask you." "Then ask someone." Caldwell pushed back his chair. "Security can handle Ms. Brooks while we handle the company." Danielle felt every executive looking at her blue badge again. Temporary. Replaceable. Someone who should have been downstairs checking shipping manifests, not questioning men whose names were engraved on office doors. Richard pointed toward the exit. "Go back to logistics." Danielle did not move. "Those plants are not your biggest problem." Caldwell's expression tightened. "Enough. The vendors share more than a warehouse." She slid the invoices toward Richard. "Their payment cycles are synchronized. Same dates. Same amounts split below review thresholds." Richard glanced down, then pushed the pages away. "You are making accusations from spreadsheets." "I am following the money." "With what authority?" His voice cracked across the room. Danielle held his stare. "None." A beat passed. "That does not make the numbers less real." Silence swallowed the room. Richard's face hardened, but before he could answer, his chief financial officer leaned toward the invoices. "Wait." Caldwell turned. "What?" The man pulled one page closer. Fluorescent light flashed across his glasses. "She is right about the thresholds." Caldwell gave a dismissive laugh. "Coincidence?" 37 payments? Danielle asked. The chief financial officer looked up sharply. 37? Danielle nodded. Over 9 months. The air changed. Richard slowly lowered himself into his chair. For 1 second, Danielle saw uncertainty behind his eyes. Then Caldwell stepped between them. "Richard, she had no authorization to access 9 months of vendor records." There it was. Not denial. Access. Danielle felt a cold line move down her spine. Richard noticed it too. His gaze narrowed. "Nathan, how did you know where she looked?" Caldwell paused. Barely half a second. "Because she just told us." Danielle had not. The room went still. Somewhere beyond the glass wall, an elevator chimed. Caldwell adjusted his cuff and smiled again. "We are wasting time." Richard's phone rang. This time he answered. "Whitmore." His expression changed almost immediately. "What do you mean the shipment never arrived?" Danielle could hear a distant voice speaking fast through the receiver. Richard stood. Check the secondary warehouse. Another pause. What? His knuckles whitened around the phone. He ended the call without saying goodbye. Memphis has enough components for 11 hours. No one breathed. The system says 6 days, someone whispered. The system is lying, Danielle said. Richard looked at her, and for the first time there was no mockery in his face. Only fear. Then Caldwell spoke. We should move this downstairs. He walked toward the door. Danielle's eyes followed him through the glass corridor, past the executive elevators and toward the restricted operations wing. Something about his pace bothered her. Too calm. Too deliberate. Richard ordered the room toward emergency operations, and minutes later the polished marble gave way to concrete floors, fluorescent strips, and the deep mechanical vibration of the company's logistics command center beneath the tower. Cooling fans roared behind server cabinets. Printers spat shipping reports onto trays. Employees in work boots turned as Richard entered, then stared when Danielle followed several steps behind him. Her blue badge suddenly felt heavier against her chest. Pull every vendor authorization for the last 12 months, Richard ordered. A systems analyst typed quickly. I cannot. Richard stepped closer. Why? The archive is locked. Danielle felt her stomach drop. By whom? The analyst hesitated. Executive credentials. Caldwell appeared behind them. Standard security protocol. Danielle turned toward him. A bead of sweat rested near his temple despite the cold air. Richard noticed it. Unlock it. Richard, we have factories shutting down. This is not the time for a witch hunt. Unlock it. Caldwell's jaw flexed. He entered his credentials. The monitor flickered. Access denied. The analyst tried again. Same result. Then a new message appeared. Archive purge in progress. Danielle lunged toward the keyboard, not touching it, only reading the countdown. 9 minutes, 48 seconds. 9 minutes, 47. Someone scheduled a deletion, she said. Richard stared at Caldwell. Caldwell stared at the screen. Cancel it, Richard ordered. The analyst shook his head. Whoever initiated it removed local permissions. Danielle scanned the terminal, following the authorization chain line by line. Her palms were damp now. Then she saw the destination address attached to the purge request. She knew that address. She had seen it on the vendor invoices. Richard. He came beside her. Danielle pointed at the monitor. The deletion is routing through the same warehouse network. Richard went pale. Meaning? Danielle looked through the glass at Caldwell. He was already walking away. Meaning whoever created your fake inventory is deleting the proof right now. Richard spun toward the door. But Danielle saw something else appear at the bottom of the screen before it vanished. A scheduled financial transfer, timestamped for midnight, tied to a lender she had never seen in company records. She leaned closer, pulse hammering. The amount was not millions. It was large enough to change ownership of the company. And beside the transfer authorization was a digital signature that made her stop breathing. It did not belong to Nathan Caldwell. It belonged to Richard Whitmore. That is my signature. Richard Whitmore's voice came out almost too quietly to hear. Danielle stared at the monitor as the server fans roared behind them, cold fluorescent light trembling across rows of metal cabinets. The digital authorization was unmistakable. Richard A. Whitmore. Midnight transfer. Corporate control agreement. Richard reached past her for the keyboard. Move. Danielle stayed planted. Do not touch it. His eyes snapped toward her. This is my company. Then stop helping whoever is stealing it. Every head in the operations center turned. A forklift motor hummed somewhere beyond the loading bay, then died, leaving her words hanging in the sudden quiet. Richard's face hardened. You are forgetting yourself again. Danielle felt the humiliation burn through her chest, but her eyes stayed on the screen. No. I am remembering the numbers. Nathan Caldwell had disappeared from the room. That mattered. So did the signature. Danielle enlarged the authorization record while the purge countdown dropped below 8 minutes. Her fingers moved quickly over the keyboard, tracing timestamps, certificate IDs, and login locations. Richard stood over her shoulder, impatient enough that she could feel the heat of him. "You signed this," the chief financial officer said. Richard turned sharply. "I signed nothing. The certificate is valid." "Then the system is wrong." Danielle shook her head. "The system is telling the truth. We are asking the wrong question." Richard gave a bitter laugh. "And your degree taught you that?" Several employees looked down. One young warehouse supervisor had already lifted his phone, camera lens catching the harsh white light. Richard noticed. "Put that away." The phone disappeared. Danielle zoomed into the signature metadata. "Your certificate approved the transfer at 6:14 yesterday morning." Richard froze. "I was in Chicago." "Exactly." She pulled up the building access log. Richard's executive credential had entered the 42nd floor at 6:11. 3 minutes before the signature. A nervous murmur moved through the room. Richard stepped closer to the screen. "That is impossible." Danielle opened another record. His badge had also entered the executive garage at 5:58. A security camera icon sat beside the timestamp. "Play it," Richard ordered. The analyst hesitated. "Sir, the footage is restricted." "Play it." The video opened. Gray concrete filled the monitor. Overhead lights reflected against the hood of a black sedan. At 5:58, a man stepped from the elevator and crossed toward Richard's reserved parking space. Same height. Same dark overcoat. Same silver hair. Richard's breathing stopped. The man turned toward the camera. The image glitched. Static swallowed his face. Then the footage jumped forward 17 seconds. "Convenient," Danielle whispered. Richard looked at her. "What are you implying?" "Someone wanted the camera to prove you were here without letting us see who was actually here." The purge countdown hit 6 minutes. A printer suddenly came alive behind them, spitting pages into a tray. Danielle flinched. So did everyone else. The analyst stared at his monitor. "I did not print anything." One page slid out. Then another. Then 10 more. Danielle grabbed the first sheet. Vendor termination notices. Emergency asset transfers. Factory shutdown authorizations. All carrying Richard's digital signature. "They are building a paper trail," she said. "For what?" Richard demanded. Danielle looked at the dates. Tomorrow. 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 Every document became effective after midnight. Her pulse climbed. "To make it look like you destroyed your own company." The room erupted in overlapping voices. Richard slammed his palm against the desk. "Enough. Shut the network down." Danielle spun toward him. "No, I said shut it down. If you kill the network, we lose the live trail. And if we leave it running, they delete everything." "Not everything." She pointed toward the transfer certificate. "This signature was cloned, but whoever cloned it made one mistake." Richard stared at her. "What mistake?" Danielle pulled up 2 authorization hashes side by side. They looked identical until she highlighted the final digits. "Your legitimate signatures rotate encryption tokens every 24 hours. This one used yesterday's token after it had expired." The chief financial officer leaned closer. "So somebody copied an older authorization from a machine that still had the token cached." Danielle searched the network map. 4 executive terminals appeared. 3 were green. 1 flashed amber. Her throat tightened. "Executive Office 42C." Richard looked at the label. "That is Nathan's office." The reversal hit the room like a pressure drop. Richard said nothing. His confidence finally cracked. Danielle clicked the terminal. Access blocked. The purge countdown showed 4 minutes, 12 seconds. Then every overhead light flickered. Once. Twice. The machinery beyond the wall groaned as backup power engaged. A warning tone sounded. Someone had just isolated the executive floor from the internal network. "He knows we found him," Danielle said. Richard grabbed his phone and called Caldwell. Straight to voicemail. Footsteps echoed from the concrete corridor. 2 security officers appeared, followed by Nathan. He was no longer smiling. "Step away from the terminal, Danielle." Richard turned. "Nathan, what did you do?" Caldwell ignored him. His eyes stayed on Danielle. "She accessed protected systems without authorization. She has contaminated the audit trail." Danielle's stomach dropped. Richard looked between them, doubt rushing back into his face. Caldwell held up a tablet. "I have the access logs." He turned the screen toward Richard. Danielle's employee ID appeared beside every unauthorized transfer, every altered inventory record, every deleted file. Her name filled the page. Danielle Brooks. Richard slowly looked at her. The room changed instantly. The employees who had been watching her with awe now stepped back. Danielle felt the blood drain from her hands. Caldwell spoke softly. "You wanted to know who was destroying your company." He pointed at her blue badge. "There she is." For 3 terrible seconds, Richard said nothing. Then he reached for Danielle's folder, opened it, and stared at the degree he had mocked upstairs. His expression turned cold again. "Security." Danielle heard shoes scrape across the concrete behind her. She looked once more at Caldwell's tablet, desperate for something everyone else had missed. Then she saw it. A timestamp beside her supposed login. 6:14 yesterday morning. The exact moment Richard's stolen signature had been used. Danielle slowly raised her eyes to Caldwell. "You made one more mistake." His face changed. "Barely. But she saw it." Richard did too. "Yesterday at 6:14, Danielle said, her voice almost a whisper. "I was not in this building." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a hospital parking receipt. Richard stared at the printed time. 6:07 in the morning? 43 miles away. Then Danielle looked at the security camera above the operations door. Its tiny red light blinked steadily. "And if your cameras are still recording," she said, "we are about to find out who is wearing my badge. Pull the camera feed. Now." Richard's voice cracked through the operations center as the purge countdown dropped below 3 minutes. Cold fluorescent light flashed across steel cabinets, while server fans screamed behind Danielle. Nathan Caldwell stood perfectly still, but a thin line of sweat had appeared above his collar. The analyst opened the security archive. 6:14 yesterday morning? Grainy footage filled the monitor. An empty corridor. A cleaning cart. Then a figure stepped from the stairwell wearing Danielle's blue contractor badge. Richard leaned forward. "Zoom in." The image sharpened. The person was taller than Danielle. Broader shoulders. Baseball cap pulled low. He swiped her badge, entered the restricted operations room, and disappeared inside. Whispers spread through the employees behind them. A phone camera clicked on. Caldwell's jaw tightened. "That proves nothing. She could have given someone her badge." Danielle turned slowly. "My badge was reported missing Tuesday." The room quieted. "Human Resources issued this replacement Wednesday morning." She lifted the badge hanging from her neck. Richard looked at Caldwell. "The badge in that video should have been dead." Caldwell answered too quickly. "Unless she lied about losing it." Danielle felt the old humiliation return, sharper now. Every answer she gave became another reason to suspect her. Richard rubbed a hand across his mouth. His company was collapsing around him, and pride kept pulling him toward the explanation that required the least pain. "Danielle," he said, "why were you at a hospital yesterday?" The question landed unexpectedly. She glanced at the receipt still in his hand. "My mother had an appointment." "Can anyone verify that?" Her eyes hardened. "Yes." Richard nodded toward security. "Verify it." Danielle stared at him. "You still think this is me?" I think somebody is taking my company apart. And I am the easiest person in the room to blame. No one spoke. Richard's eyes flicked toward her contractor badge, then away. The purge timer hit 2 minutes, 11 seconds. Danielle turned back to the monitor. Hurt could wait. The data could not. The old badge was disabled by human resources, she said. So whoever used it had to reactivate it. The analyst started typing. Badge permissions are controlled through executive security. Show the authorization. Caldwell stepped forward. We do not have time for this. Danielle did not look at him. That is exactly why we have time for it. The analyst opened the access history. One line appeared. Reactivation approved, Office of the Chief Operating Officer. The room inhaled as one. Richard slowly turned toward Caldwell. Caldwell's face went pale, then firm. My office processes hundreds of requests. With your credentials? Richard asked. My staff has delegated access. Name who did it. Caldwell hesitated. 1 second. 2. Danielle heard the mechanical vibration beneath the floor change pitch. The servers were working harder. Richard, she said. Something else is happening. The analyst looked at his screen. Network traffic just tripled. A warning tone sounded. Then another. Warehouse monitors across the room began flashing red. Cleveland lost routing. St. Louis lost shipping authorization. Memphis disappeared entirely from the logistics map. What is happening? Richard demanded. The purge is spreading, Danielle said. No, the analyst whispered. It is not deleting anymore. He stared at the code scrolling across his screen. It is exporting. Danielle's blood went cold. Someone was copying the records before destroying them. Destination? She asked. The analyst traced the traffic. External server. Encrypted. Caldwell backed toward the corridor. Richard saw him. Do not move. For the first time, Caldwell's polished calm broke. You are going to trust a contractor over the man who helped build this company? Richard stepped toward him. I am going to trust the evidence. Danielle felt the words hit harder than she expected. Minutes earlier, Richard had demanded proof that she was not a criminal. Now his eyes were finally where hers had been from the beginning. Caldwell laughed once, bitter and breathless. Evidence? He pointed toward Danielle. Ask your genius why the company is still collapsing while I am standing right here. Danielle froze. He was right about one thing. If Caldwell had initiated everything, why was the attack accelerating after his access had been blocked? The purge countdown reached 58 seconds. Danielle scanned the network map again. Executive Office. Finance. Operations. Vendor Gateway. 4 paths converged on one hidden connection she had mistaken for backup traffic. Her pulse slammed against her throat. There is another user. Richard turned. Who? I do not know yet. She opened the connection. Access level, board authority. Richard's expression changed. Only 5 people had that clearance. Trace it. Danielle did. The signal did not lead upstairs. It led beneath them. That cannot be right, the analyst whispered. Danielle followed the address through the building network. Basement level 2. Restricted records garage. Less than 200 feet from where they were standing. A heavy mechanical hum rolled through the wall, followed by the distant sound of a metal door closing. Richard looked toward the corridor. So did everyone else. Then Danielle's monitor flashed. Purge complete. The vendor files vanished. The payment records vanished. Every forged authorization disappeared. A stunned silence swallowed the room. Richard stared at the blank screen as if he had just watched 28 years of his life fall through the floor. Caldwell exhaled. Almost relieved. Danielle noticed. Then one small window appeared in the corner of her monitor. Backup synchronization, successful. She leaned closer. Wait. Richard looked at her. Danielle opened the backup. One file had survived because she had redirected the audit cache seconds before the purge. Inside was a list of scheduled transactions. The midnight transfer was there. So were the shell companies. And beneath them was something none of them expected, a signed board resolution authorizing Richard Whitmore's removal as Chief Executive Officer at 12:01 in the morning. Richard stopped breathing. Danielle scrolled to the approving directors. 4 names. Then a 5th. Her hand went still on the mouse. Richard saw her face. What? Danielle could barely force the words out. Nathan was never taking your company alone. She turned the monitor toward him. Richard read the final name, and every trace of anger left his face. What remained looked almost like grief. The 5th signature belonged to the one person Richard had trusted more than anyone in the building, his own daughter, Claire Whitmore. Claire signed this? Richard's voice barely survived the noise of the server room. Danielle watched his eyes lock onto his daughter's name while warning lights pulsed across the steel cabinets. For the first time that night, Richard Whitmore did not look powerful. He looked betrayed. Then the elevator doors opened. Claire Whitmore stepped out in a charcoal coat, followed by 2 board members and the company's outside counsel. Their shoes struck the concrete in sharp, measured beats. Several employees lifted their phones. Tiny camera lights appeared across the room. Claire saw the monitor and stopped. Dad? Richard turned on her. Tell me this is forged. She did not answer fast enough. His face collapsed. Tell me. You were supposed to be informed tomorrow. Richard stared at her as if she had spoken another language. Tomorrow? Claire glanced at Danielle, then Caldwell. This was not supposed to happen like this. Richard's voice rose. You signed away my company. I signed a succession resolution. Behind my back. Because you stopped listening to everyone. The words cut through the mechanical hum. Richard looked around and realized dozens of employees were watching. Investors had begun joining the emergency video conference on the wall monitor. Faces appeared one by one from New York, Boston, Chicago. His humiliation was no longer private. Turn those cameras off, he snapped. Nobody moved. Claire stepped closer. Dad, the board believed you had become a liability. Richard laughed, but there was no humor in it. And Nathan helped you reach that conclusion? Claire's eyes shifted toward Caldwell. Danielle caught it. Fear. Not trust. Claire, Danielle said quietly, did you authorize the vendor transfers? Claire frowned. What vendor transfers? Caldwell moved immediately. Do not answer her. Danielle turned. Why? Because she is a contractor under investigation. The old insult landed again, now in front of employees, attorneys, directors, and investors. Caldwell pointed at Danielle's badge. She accessed restricted records, manipulated internal systems, and somehow convinced Richard that everyone except her is compromised. A murmur moved through the room. Richard's doubt returned for one dangerous second. Claire looked directly at Danielle. Did you alter the backup? Danielle felt every camera turn toward her. I preserved it. Without authorization? Yes. Outside counsel stepped forward. Then nobody touches that terminal until forensic review. Richard slammed his hand against the metal desk. We do not have time for forensic review. A warning alarm answered him. The wall display changed. Credit facility status, pending default review. Time remaining, 43 minutes. The investors on the screen began talking over one another. One demanded Richard resign immediately. Another asked whether federal regulators had been notified. Richard's neck flushed red. Nobody is taking this company from me. Danielle heard the desperation underneath the anger. She looked at the transaction map again. Something still bothered her. Claire's signature authorized Richard's removal, but not the transfer of ownership. Those were separate events. Separate permissions. Someone had hidden one inside the panic created by the other. Claire, Danielle said, when did Nathan first show you evidence against your father? Caldwell stepped between them. This interview is over. Danielle ignored him. Claire's face tightened. 3 months ago. What evidence? Declining controls. Irregular approvals. Unreported liabilities. Danielle's pulse jumped. The same irregularities happening tonight? Claire hesitated. Yes. Danielle looked at Richard. Then Caldwell. Then back at Claire. He did not discover the crisis. Silence. He built it. Caldwell's expression hardened. Careful. Danielle pulled up the surviving audit cache. Her hands were damp, but steady. The first fake vendor appeared 92 days ago. When did Nathan approach you? Claire whispered. 91. The room went dead quiet. Richard slowly turned toward Caldwell. Claire covered her mouth. The emotional reversal spread across her face before anyone spoke. Oh my God! Caldwell exhaled through his nose. Correlation is not proof. No, Danielle said. But this is. She opened the vendor ownership records preserved in the cache and followed the registration chain through 2 shell corporations. One investor leaned toward his camera. Outside counsel stepped closer. Danielle reached the final beneficial owner field. Blank. It was erased, Richard said. Not erased. Danielle enlarged a metadata line beneath it. Redirected. She followed the linked tax identification record. The screen loaded slowly while the machinery vibrated beneath their feet. Caldwell took 1 step backward. Danielle saw him do it. So did Claire. The record appeared. Claire gasped. Richard gripped the desk. The shell company was not registered to Caldwell. It was registered to a private trust bearing Claire Whitmore's name. Every phone camera in the room rose higher. No, Claire whispered. I have never seen that company. Richard stared at his daughter, devastation replacing fury. Claire, Dad, I swear. Caldwell spoke softly. Richard, you can see what happened. Danielle looked at him. Too soft. Too ready. He wanted Richard to blame Claire. That was the design. Danielle searched the trust creation date. Her eyes narrowed. Wait. The trust had been opened 8 years earlier, when Claire was 17. She could not have executed the original documents alone. Danielle opened the trustee record. A name appeared. Richard made a sound like the air had been knocked from him. Claire began shaking her head. Caldwell stopped moving entirely. The trustee was not Nathan Caldwell. It was Margaret Whitmore, Richard's late wife. Richard stared at the screen in stunned silence. Margaret died 6 years ago. Danielle's eyes dropped to the latest authentication timestamp. Her heartbeat seemed to disappear. The trust had been accessed 72 minutes earlier. From inside the building. Claire whispered. That is impossible. Then a new security notification flashed across the monitor. Basement level 2, private archive access granted. Danielle looked toward the dark concrete corridor leading deeper beneath the tower. A second notification appeared. User authenticated, Margaret Whitmore. Richard went completely still. Somewhere beyond the locked metal doors, an elevator began moving upward. The elevator kept rising. Richard Whitmore watched the floor numbers change on the security monitor, while the operations center slowly fell silent around him. Basement 2. Basement 1. Lobby. No one spoke. Even the server fans seemed quieter now, their low mechanical hums settling beneath the sound of 20 people trying not to breathe too loudly. Danielle stood at the terminal, one hand resting beside the keyboard. Cold light reflected across her face. Every camera in the room was pointed toward her now, but she no longer seemed to notice. Stop the elevator, Richard said. The security supervisor tried. Access denied? Richard swallowed. Override it. I cannot. Claire moved closer to her father. Dad, Mom is dead. Richard did not answer. His phone vibrated against the metal desk. He ignored it. Danielle stared at the authentication record. Something was wrong, but not in the way everyone thought. Margaret Whitmore had accessed the trust 72 minutes ago. Yet the elevator had only begun moving seconds earlier. "Nobody is coming up from that archive," Danielle said. Richard looked at her sharply. "You just watched the elevator move." "I watched a system tell us it moved." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Danielle pulled up the elevator telemetry. Floor numbers. Door status. Access credentials. Then she opened the building's power log beside it. Her breathing slowed. "The elevator supposedly left basement 2 at 11:17. She pointed to another timestamp. "But basement 2 lost elevator power at 11:12. The security supervisor leaned toward the screen. "She is right." A murmur moved through the employees. Richard stared at Danielle. "Then what are we hearing?" The elevator motor groaned somewhere above them. Danielle listened. Once. Twice. The sound was too clean. Too perfectly timed. "Recorded audio," she said. Caldwell gave a dry laugh. "Now the building is performing theater?" Danielle turned toward him. "Someone has been performing theater all night." The room went quiet again. She opened the security event sequence and began stripping away automated alerts one by one. The fake elevator movement. Margaret's authentication. The archive access. Each had appeared immediately after Danielle uncovered another piece of the financial trail. Claire's eyes widened. "They are distractions." Danielle nodded. "Not random ones. Emotional ones." Richard looked at Margaret's name on the monitor. His shoulders lowered as if something heavy had finally found them. Whoever had designed this knew exactly what would make him stop thinking. His company. His daughter. His dead wife. Danielle studied him for a moment, then looked back at the data. "They know you." Richard's voice was rough. "Nathan knows me." Caldwell's jaw tightened. "Do not drag me into your paranoia." Danielle did not answer. Instead, she pulled the original trust documents. The printer beside her clicked softly, then fed out a single page. Richard watched her pick it up. "What?" Danielle ran her finger beneath Margaret's signature. "This is real." Claire stepped closer. "Then somebody stole her credentials." "Maybe." Danielle compared the trust document with the authentication record. Same name. Same account. Different identity certificate. She stopped. There it was. Small enough that every executive, lawyer, and security specialist had missed it. "Margaret's account was never used tonight." Richard stared at her. "Her name is right there. Her display name is." Danielle turned the monitor toward him. "But the certificate belongs to a recovery administrator." Outside counsel leaned forward. "Who has that authority?" The security supervisor typed, then went still. "Only the original corporate continuity officer." Richard's expression changed. "We eliminated that position years ago." "Who held it?" Danielle asked. Nobody answered. She looked around the room. Caldwell had stopped blinking. Danielle noticed. Richard noticed her noticing. "Nathan?" Richard asked. Caldwell shook his head slowly. "Not me," Claire whispered. "Mom did." Danielle looked back at the old trust document. Margaret Whitmore had been continuity officer when the trust was created. But after her death, someone would have inherited emergency recovery authority. Danielle searched the succession archive. The loading icon turned silently. Around her, phones had lowered. Nobody was filming now. They were watching her. Not the contractor badge. Not the black woman Richard had mocked upstairs. Her. The only person in the room who had consistently seen through every false trail. Richard's eyes dropped to the blue badge hanging against her jacket. His face tightened with something that looked like shame. "I should have listened to you in the boardroom," he said quietly. Danielle did not look at him. "Listen now." The succession record opened. One name appeared. Richard stepped closer. Claire covered her mouth. Caldwell whispered something Danielle could not hear. The recovery authority belonged to Samuel Whitmore, Richard's younger brother. Samuel has been dead for 11 years, Richard said. Danielle checked the certificate activity. Her fingers stopped. Samuel's credentials had not been dormant for 11 years. They had been used every quarter. Always for less than 4 seconds. Always after midnight. Someone had been quietly keeping his access alive. Who manages legacy credentials? Danielle asked. The security supervisor looked embarrassed. Executive infrastructure. Specific person. He hesitated. Then looked toward Caldwell. The entire room followed his eyes. Caldwell's face emptied. Richard took one slow step toward him. Nathan. Caldwell said nothing. A phone vibrated somewhere in the silence. Then Danielle's monitor changed by itself. A black window opened over every other application. White letters appeared one line at a time. You are looking at the wrong man. Claire gripped Richard's arm. Danielle did not move. Another line appeared. Check Danielle Brooks. Richard's eyes shifted toward her. Then the final line arrived. Ask her why her mother met Margaret Whitmore 3 days before she died. For the first time all night, Danielle's composure broke. Her hand slipped from the desk. Richard stared at her. Danielle? She could hear nothing now but her own breathing. Her mother had never told her she knew Margaret Whitmore. Then Danielle remembered the hospital that morning. Her mother's sudden fear when Danielle mentioned the Whitmore account. The way she had grabbed Danielle's wrist and said 5 strange words she had dismissed at the time. Stay away from that company. Danielle slowly lifted her eyes. Across the room, Caldwell was no longer watching Richard. He was watching her. And in his face she saw something far worse than fear. Recognition. How do you know my mother? Danielle asked. Her voice was quiet, but the question stopped the room colder than any alarm had. Nathan Caldwell stood beneath the fluorescent lights, his face reflected faintly in the black monitor behind him. For 3 seconds he said nothing. That was enough. Richard saw it. Claire saw it. So did every employee holding a phone. Nathan, Richard said. Answer her. Caldwell's eyes stayed on Danielle. Your mother worked here. Danielle's breath caught. She was a nurse. After she left Whitmore. The server fans shifted into a lower hum. Danielle felt the floor beneath her shoes as if the building had tilted. What did she do here? Caldwell looked toward Richard. Ask him? Richard's face tightened. I have never met her mother. Exactly, Danielle whispered. Something clicked into place. Her mother's warning. Margaret's trust. Samuel's credentials. The fake vendors. The forged signatures. Danielle turned back to the terminal. What was my mother's full name in your records? The security supervisor searched. Evelyn Brooks. Nothing. Danielle closed her eyes for half a second. Try Evelyn Carter. A result appeared instantly. Richard stepped closer. Caldwell went pale. Employee status. Former internal audit analyst. Claire whispered. Oh my God! Danielle opened the archived personnel file. Her mother had not merely worked at Whitmore Medical. She had investigated executive procurement fraud alongside Margaret Whitmore 12 years earlier. Danielle's hands began to tremble, but her voice remained steady. Open their final audit. Access sealed. Richard leaned over the desk. By whose authority? The answer appeared. Samuel Whitmore. Caldwell took another step backward. Danielle saw it. You kept Samuel's credentials alive because you needed access to whatever he buried. Caldwell's voice sharpened. You do not know what you are talking about. Then why did you recognize me? Silence. Phones rose higher. On the investor screen, no one spoke. Danielle pulled up her hiring record. Her application had been rejected twice before suddenly being approved 6 months ago. The override came from Caldwell's office. Her stomach turned. You hired me. Caldwell shook his head. Human Resources hired you. You overrode them. Richard looked at Caldwell as if seeing him for the first time. Why? Danielle answered before he could. Because he was looking for something. She opened her employee onboarding archive. Driver's license. Tax forms. Background check. Then a scanned emergency contact document containing her mother's current address. Caldwell lunged verbally, his composure finally cracking. Close that file. Danielle stopped. The entire room heard him. Richard's eyes narrowed. Why? Caldwell said nothing. Danielle looked down at the document. A handwritten notation had been added after onboarding, possible key holder. Her pulse thundered. Key to what? Claire asked. Danielle remembered the hospital. Her mother clutching her wrist. Stay away from that company. But there had been something else in Evelyn's hospital bag that morning. An old brass key on a faded red cord. Danielle had seen it 100 times growing up and never asked what it opened. Her eyes moved to the private archive map. Basement 2. Storage Vault C. Manual lock. No network connection. The archive, Danielle whispered. Caldwell's face changed. Richard caught it. Security, lock down basement 2. The supervisor reached for the console. Caldwell spoke fast. If you do that, the lenders will assume internal fraud and freeze everything. They are already preparing default, Danielle said. 31 minutes, the chief financial officer added. Richard looked trapped between the company he might lose and the woman he had mocked less than an hour earlier. Tell me what to do, he said. The room went completely still. Danielle looked at him. Richard Whitmore, who had laughed at her degree, dismissed her badge, questioned her honesty, and ordered security toward her, was now asking her for the answer in front of his board, his daughter, his employees, and his investors. Danielle did not smile. Give me control of the audit network. Outside counsel immediately objected. She is not authorized. Richard did not look away from Danielle. She is now. The reversal moved visibly through the room. The security supervisor removed his hands from the keyboard. The chief financial officer stepped aside. Employees who had backed away from Danielle earlier now cleared a path toward the central terminal. Even the investors on the wall fell silent. Danielle sat down. Cold light washed across her face. First, isolate the forged transactions without killing the network. Second, mirror every surviving log to an external legal hold. Third, notify the lender that we have identified credential compromise before they declare default. Her fingers moved. One screen turned green. Then another. The warehouse routing stabilized. The deletion traffic stopped. The chief financial officer stared at the monitor. She stopped it. Richard said nothing. Danielle redirected the lender package, attached the surviving audit trail, and froze the midnight ownership transfer. Status: suspended pending fraud review. A sound moved through the room, not cheering, just dozens of people exhaling at once. Richard gripped the back of a chair. His company had been minutes from disappearing, and the contractor he had humiliated had just bought it time. Caldwell turned toward the corridor. Do not, Claire said. He stopped. Danielle opened one final archived message from Margaret Whitmore to Evelyn Carter. The timestamp was 3 days before Margaret died. Only the subject line remained. If anything happens to me, do not trust Nathan. Richard's face emptied. Claire stared at Caldwell. Every phone camera swung toward him. But Danielle was staring at something else. Beneath the deleted message was an attachment reference that had never been uploaded. Physical copy only. Location Vault C, Richard whispered. The key. Danielle reached for her phone to call her mother. Before she could dial, it rang. Danielle answered immediately. Mom? Nothing. Only slow breathing. Then Evelyn's frightened voice came through. Danielle, listen to me. Do not open that vault. Danielle stood. Why? A long silence followed. When Evelyn finally answered, Richard heard every word through the speaker. Because what Margaret hid inside does not prove Nathan stole the company. Caldwell closed his eyes. Evelyn's voice broke. It proves who helped him. Richard stepped closer. Who? Danielle's mother whispered one name, and Claire Whitmore slowly turned toward her father. Richard. Evelyn's voice came through the speaker so softly that the name seemed to pull all the air from the room. Claire turned toward her father. Nathan Caldwell did not move. Richard Whitmore stared at Danielle's phone as the server cabinets hummed behind him, their cold blue lights reflecting across a face that suddenly looked 20 years older. No, he said. Evelyn breathed slowly on the other end. You signed the authorization, Richard. Claire stepped back. Dad? I do not know what she is talking about. Danielle said nothing. She watched him carefully. Not his anger. His hands. Richard's right hand had begun to tremble. What authorization? Danielle asked. Evelyn hesitated. 12 years ago, Margaret and I found payments routed through a medical supply partnership Nathan controlled. We prepared the audit. Margaret wanted to take it to the board. Caldwell's eyes dropped. The room had become so quiet that the soft vibration of a phone against a desk made several people glance toward it. Richard stopped the investigation. Evelyn continued. Claire's eyes filled. Why? Richard closed them. And Danielle understood before he answered. Samuel. His younger brother. The dead man whose credentials had been kept alive for 11 years. Richard lowered himself into a chair. Samuel came to me the night before the board meeting. He said the transactions were his. Caldwell finally spoke. Richard, you do not have to explain ancient family business to these people. Richard looked up. Something in him had changed. Be quiet, Nathan. Caldwell froze. Richard's voice was not loud anymore. It did not need to be. Samuel told me he had moved money to keep one of our early plants alive. He said Margaret misunderstood the accounts. Evelyn answered through the phone. And you believed him? Richard swallowed. He was my brother. So you sealed our audit? Richard looked toward the floor. Yes. Claire covered her mouth. Around the room, the employees who had once watched Richard with fear now watched him with something quieter. Disappointment. The investors remained frozen across the wall of screens. Danielle felt no satisfaction. Only the weight of how long one decision could live. Nathan knew, she said. Richard looked at her. He knew you would protect Samuel. Danielle turned toward Caldwell. And once the audit disappeared, he knew exactly what kind of man you were when family and evidence stood on opposite sides. Caldwell's expression tightened. You are guessing. Danielle shook her head. No. She pointed toward the surviving records. You spent 12 years building everything around Richard's blind spots. Samuel's credentials. Margaret's trust. Claire's succession vote. His own signature. She looked at Richard. Every trap depended on you trusting the person closest to you instead of the evidence in front of you. The words landed harder than an accusation. Richard looked at Danielle's blue contractor badge. Then at the resume still lying among the papers someone had carried downstairs from the boardroom. The degree he had mocked was visible beneath a coffee stain. His face changed. He finally saw the pattern too. Samuel. Nathan. Claire. Danielle. Different years. Same mistake. Richard had decided who deserved credibility before hearing what they knew. And tonight, he whispered, I did it again. Danielle held his gaze. Yes. No cruelty. No triumph. Just the truth. That made Richard look away. One employee slowly lowered his phone. Then another. The room no longer felt like an audience waiting for a powerful man to fall. It felt like witnesses watching him understand why he had fallen. Caldwell moved toward the elevator. This is sentimental nonsense. The lender deadline is still running. The chief financial officer checked the clock. 24 minutes. Danielle turned immediately toward the terminal. Then we finish this. Richard stared at her. After everything I said to you? Danielle placed both hands beside the keyboard. There are 4,800 employees who did not say those things. Richard's eyes filled with something he could not hide fast enough. Claire looked at Danielle differently now, not with suspicion, not even gratitude. Respect. Danielle began issuing instructions. Legal sends the preserved audit cash to the lender. Finance freezes every entity connected to the Shell network. Security preserves physical access records. Nobody deletes anything. People moved before Richard could repeat a single order. The reversal was complete and strangely quiet. The contractor was directing the room. Executives were listening. Richard remained beside the desk, silent. Caldwell did not. You cannot freeze those accounts without board authority. Claire turned toward him. She has mine. One director on the wall spoke next. And mine. Another followed. Mine too. Outside counsel nodded. That is sufficient. Caldwell's face lost its last trace of certainty. Danielle submitted the emergency fraud package. The lender status changed from pending default to review in progress. A low exhale moved through the room. Then the warehouse systems returned one by one. Memphis. Cleveland. St. Louis. Green lights replaced red across the logistics map. Someone near the loading bay whispered, "She did it!" Richard heard him. So did Danielle. She did not turn around. Richard stepped beside her. "Ms. Brooks." She looked up. His voice nearly failed. "I humiliated you in front of this company because I thought your badge told me what you were worth." Danielle remained still. Cameras were recording again, but Richard did not look toward them. "I was wrong." No one moved. "About your degree. About your judgment. About you." Danielle's expression softened, but only slightly. "An apology does not fix the system that made it easy to dismiss me." Richard nodded slowly. "Then help me fix the system." Danielle looked toward the employees gathered beneath the cold lights. People who had watched security move toward her. People who had stepped away when her name appeared in the logs. Now none of them looked away. "First we save their jobs," she said. "Then we talk." Richard nodded. "Fair." For the first time, he stepped aside and let Danielle stand at the center of the terminal. Then Evelyn's voice came through the forgotten phone. "Danielle." Danielle lifted it. "I am here, Mom. There is one thing you still do not know." The room quieted again. Evelyn's breathing shook. Margaret did not hide that evidence only to expose Nathan. Richard slowly raised his head. "What else is in the vault?" A long pause. "A letter," Evelyn said. "For Richard." Claire looked at her father. Richard's face went still. "From Margaret?" "Yes." Danielle felt the room tighten around those two words. Evelyn continued, almost whispering. "She wrote it the night she realized Richard had buried our investigation." Richard gripped the edge of the desk. "What does it say?" Evelyn was silent for several seconds. "I never opened it." Then her voice broke. "But Margaret told me that if Richard ever became the man who could hear the truth without protecting his pride, I should give it to him." No one spoke. The machines continued their soft, steady hum. Richard looked across the room at Danielle, the woman he had mocked hours earlier, then down at his own shaking hands. And for the first time that night, saving the company no longer looked like the hardest thing he would have to face. Morning arrived without applause. Pale gold light slipped through the narrow windows above the operations floor, touching steel cabinets that had finally gone quiet. The warning alarms were gone. Memphis was shipping again. Cleveland was running. St. Louis had confirmed its first clean inventory count before sunrise. On the wall, the lender status had changed to default suspended, investigation active. Nathan Caldwell was gone from the room, escorted upstairs to meet outside counsel and federal investigators. Nobody celebrated. 4,800 jobs had survived the night, and somehow that felt too heavy for cheering. Danielle Brooks stood beside the central terminal with her blue contractor badge still hanging from her neck. Richard Whitmore approached carrying a small cream envelope. Margaret's handwriting crossed the front. For Richard. His fingers trembled slightly as he opened it. Claire stood several feet away. Danielle turned toward the windows, giving him privacy without leaving. Richard read silently. His shoulders lowered. He stopped halfway through, pressed his lips together, then continued. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully along its original crease. She knew, he said. Claire looked at him. Knew what? Richard stared at the morning light spreading across the concrete. That I would confuse protecting what I'd built with protecting what was right. No one answered. He looked toward Danielle. Hours earlier, he had laughed at her degree in front of executives. He had pointed at her badge. Questioned her authority. Questioned her honesty. Now his company was still standing because she had refused to let humiliation become silence. Richard walked to the terminal and picked up Danielle's resume. The coffee stain from the boardroom had dried across one corner. He looked at the degree printed beneath her name, then at her. I owe you more than an apology. Danielle's expression remained calm. You owe your employees a better company. Richard absorbed that without defending himself. You are right. Claire stepped forward. The board wants an emergency leadership review this afternoon. Richard nodded. They should. There was no anger in his voice now. Only acceptance. And I will cooperate. A few employees nearby exchanged quiet looks. The man who had spent the night fighting to keep control was finally willing to surrender some of it. Richard turned back to Danielle. I want you in that meeting. Danielle glanced at her blue badge. As what? The question stopped him. Richard understood exactly what she meant. Not as evidence. Not as the grateful contractor invited upstairs for a photograph. Not as the woman whose intelligence mattered only after saving everyone else. He looked toward Claire. Claire gave a small nod. As the person who found what none of us found, Richard said. Danielle held his gaze. That is not a job title. For the first time, something almost like a smile touched Claire's face. Richard nodded. Director of Risk and Supply Integrity. Full authority to build the team. Independent reporting access to the board. Danielle did not answer immediately. Around them, phone cameras that had recorded her humiliation hours earlier were lowered one by one. She looked through the glass toward the loading floor. Workers were returning to their stations. A forklift rolled slowly beneath the morning lights. Someone laughed in the distance, exhausted and relieved. I want compliance protected from executive override, Danielle said. Richard nodded. Done. Independent audits. Done. And contractor reports get reviewed on evidence, not job grade. Richard's eyes dropped briefly to her badge. Done. Danielle extended her hand. Not because everything was forgiven. Because something could finally change. Richard looked at it for half a second before taking it. His grip was careful. Equal. 3 weeks later, Danielle stepped from the elevator onto the 42nd floor. The same boardroom waited behind the glass. Same walnut table. Same skyline. But the chair near the center now carried a small nameplate, Danielle Brooks, Risk and Supply Integrity. Richard was already inside. He stood when she entered. So did the others. Danielle paused only for a moment. Then she took her seat. No one mentioned her degree. No one needed to. When the meeting ended, Richard remained behind while Danielle walked toward the elevator. On the wall outside the boardroom, the executive portraits had been rearranged around a new plaque containing only 4 words, Evidence has NO rank. Danielle saw it but did not stop. The elevator opened with a soft chime. Before stepping inside, she removed the old blue contractor badge from her coat. She held it for a second, remembering the cold operations floor, the suspicious eyes, the laughter upstairs. Then she placed it quietly on the reception desk. Richard watched from behind the glass. Danielle never looked back. The elevator doors began to close as morning sunlight crossed the hallway and caught the edge of the abandoned badge. For one brief second, the word contractor flashed gold. Then the doors met, the light disappeared, and the building returned to silence. This time, Nobody mistook that silence for weakness.